A new NBC News Marist poll suggests Americans are widely divided on race with respect to attitudes on law enforcement. This poll comes in the wake of grand jury decisions in Ferguson, Missouri and New York. The poll found confidence in the legal system plummeted 70% among African Americans. Among white Americans, 35% are less confident. So let's look behind the numbers. Do that. Joining me now, Jason Johnson, professor of political science at Hiram College, Republican strategist Joe Watkins, and criminal defense attorney and Today Show legal analyst Karen Desoto. With a welcome to you all. Good to see you. I'm going to go ladies first with you, Karen. Why are both black and white Americans losing confidence in the legal system?
Well, I think during the economic meltdown, I think that a lot of Americans lost confidence in all government across the board. However, when you look at urban areas, when you look at where the largest concentration of police officers are, they're in urban areas, okay? And urban areas are predominantly minority areas. So a lot of the concentration, the exposure to police officers is going to be in urban areas where you have the most proliferation of them. Out in the suburbs, you're not going to have contact with police officers. And when you do have contact with police officers, Alex, it's usually not for something that makes you happy. It's not because you're getting your Christmas turkey. So a lot of the contact with them is through minorities and urban areas, and you're not going to have a good taste in your mouth, especially now with the passionate response and the distrust.
Yeah. Jason, this poll also asked about whether police apply different standards to African Americans and whites. 82% of African Americans agreed that police apply different standards there. 39% of white Americans agreed. So why are those numbers so far apart?
Well, I thought one of the most interesting numbers is that when they polled all Americans, the majority, by a small percentage, actually think the police apply different rules to African Americans. That is a sea change in this country from just, say, 14 years ago during 9/11 when everybody thought the cops were fantastic. I think that change has happened not just because of what we've seen in Ferguson, not just because of what we've seen in Eric Garner, but this goes all the way back to Occupy Wall Street. You've had now a generation of Americans who have been watching police engage in behaviors that seem hostile, that seem aggressive, and even though Occupy Wall Street was majority sort of white young Americans, they're seeing now, I think the police aren't necessarily doing their job well, and I think that's where this poll is really coming from.
Interestingly, Joe, the president was speaking in an interview with BET, and here's what he had to say about the recent incidents between police and the African American community. Let's roll that.
As painful as these incidents are, and we can't equate what is happening now to what was happening 50 years ago. And if you talk to your parents, grandparents, uncles, they'll tell you that you know, things are better. Not good in some cases, but better.
So do you think the president is striking the appropriate tone here?
I think he is. I mean, I think the president is uniquely gifted to talk to all of us at a time like this, but the president knows what every African-American man knows in America, which is what happened to Eric Garner could have happened to any of us. And we have to deal with it every single day. I remember when I worked at the White House, a bunch of my colleagues said, let's play football after work. And I got worried because I knew that meant I'd have to take off my jacket and my tie. And I looked like a White House staffer when I was there, as long as I had a jacket and a tie on. But I know that to police, I look very different if I'm wearing a T-shirt and jeans. And this is what every African-American man knows in this country. And body cameras are a good step, a step in the right direction. But we all saw the video of what happened to Eric Garner, and still the grand jury did not produce an indictment. And that's just criminal in these days, in this day and time.
Wait, Joe, that's extraordinary. You literally had that concern going out with a bunch of White House staffers to play football?
Absolutely, absolutely, because it still happens to me now. It still happens to me now. I called the police because I saw a suspicious car in front of my house. My neighbors happened to be all white. The police came to my house, and I came outside to meet them to tell them that, yeah, I'm the guy that called. And the first thing they said to me was, let me see your identification. I mean, they wanted to make sure that I was actually the guy that lived in the house that actually called them. I mean, I don't think they would have done that to any of my white male neighbors or white female neighbors if they had called and said they had seen a suspicious car in the neighborhood. I got followed around in a store the other day by the owner of a small store. This happens to black men all the time. So we know that's why we sympathize, we empathize with what happened to Eric Garner and what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and what happened to that little 12-year-old boy in Cleveland, Ohio.
And Jason, you're chiming in, nodding your head, and you have similar situations to talk about?
Yeah. It's the same story. I got followed behind my house on campus by campus police. Had to prove that I was actually faculty, even though I've been at the same college for years. These things are not new to African Americans, and I think what's critical about what we're seeing here, Alex, and it's sort of what the president was talking about. Yes, things used to be worse. Obviously, things were worse 50 years ago. But what we're seeing now is it's not like violence against the poor and violence against African Americans is new. But what's new is the number of Americans of all colors, as we see in this poll, who are actually saying this is a problem. This is an economic problem. This is a political problem. And the president, Hillary Clinton, the Republicans in Congress, they need to take much more proactive steps in dealing with this unrest.
So, Karen, as you listen to these stories and you look at the poll numbers, what are the steps you think need to be taken before trust in police can be restored?
Well, Alex, a lot of what your guests are talking about is a lot of unconscious discrimination, which really takes time, mediation, and understanding, and having a restorative justice program or strategy in place, all which are things that need to be identified. There has to be resources allocated, and which is problematic given the state of the economy. Attacking unconscious discrimination is not an easy process. It's a slow process. Making people aware that they even have unconscious discrimination or reacting to minorities the way they are is tough. But you do that through mediation, you do it through restorative justice, and you keep on plugging away until you can make those changes.
I just want to ask you all about quickly the body cameras. I mean, there are poll numbers we're going to put up on how people feel about them. But in the case of Eric Garner, you had a video camera. Granted,
right.
It wasn't from the perspective of the police officer, say, you know, on his chest. But how much will body cameras go to solve the solution? Anyone want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, look, it's not going to solve anything, okay? Unless you make body cameras have to be as important to police officers as doing a scrub up is for a surgeon. It has to be a requirement. If you go into surgery and you don't scrub up, you can get sued. If a police officer engages in duty and doesn't have a body camera, they should be committing a felony. There has to be a connection between what's on the camera and the reports that people make. And I have to say this, what your other guest said about unconscious racism. This isn't just unconscious racism. This is about the government defending people who have done a bad job. You have Leon Ford Jr., a young man in Pittsburgh who got shot 5 times by the police, and they sued him.
The attitudes that people have, the instances that you were talking about, being followed and being asked for identification, those are people who are identifying with you unconsciously.
Right, but the government agencies that back up those bad attitudes have to be reformed and changed. So it's not just about attitude, it's also about consequences and having government systems that are actually reflective of the concerns of the people involved. And that's what's key here.
Right.
Okay, Joe, last word to you.
When you see wrong being done, you need to have an indictment. Period.
Right.
Okay, well, that was succinct and right to the point, and I appreciate that. Hey, Jason, Joe, Karen, good to see you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Karen.
One of the best players in the NBA